Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. I'm your host, Eli. I do not need to be welcome back. This is my second time trying to record this. I just broke a bracelet. Beads went everywhere. I am sitting in the aftermath. I'm scared to stand up for fear that more are going to fly all over the place. And we're going to try this all again. I was only like 5 minutes in recording the first time, so I think that I didn't lose too much time, and I'm still here with energy. I'm here. We're going to give it all we got. It's just there's not going to be a bracelet on my hand, and that's okay. I don't think that's a necessary part of podcasting or anything like that. So, nonetheless, every Orioles podcast, including the version of Eli from 5 minutes ago who was trying to record a podcast, is talking about Kyle Stowers. And we're talking about Kyle Stowers because we've kind of disrespected Kyle Stowers over the last year and some change. I think that we were all very excited about him, and then these new, flashier, slightly more promising names just started popping up left and right. And we're like kids in a candy store. If you give us a new piece of candy, we're just going to forget all about the one that we're holding. It's as simple as that. That is a form of disrespect. We had taken a bite out of Kyle Stowers, and then we left him on the ground when you handed us Colton Cowser. The bite out of analogy is a little bit weird, but I'm just going to let it sit. It's really... I don't think that any of us think Stowers is particularly bad in any way. Nobody's been disrespecting him in the sense of, he's like a failure of our development system. I actually use that because I did see one person say that, but we're going to ignore that. I think that by and large, Stowers is liked by the Orioles community, by the Orioles fandom. I think that he is a person who everybody recognizes there is talent. It just seems like he does not necessarily have a spot. The reason we are all talking about him, though, is because he is kicking and screaming and scratching and clawing his way into being in the conversation for a roster spot this spring. He's really doing just about everything he can. He's been playing good defense, but above anything else, he's been swinging the bat a little bit. So I'm going to talk about that real quick. Stowers has a honestly kind of amusing triple slash line. 256 batting average, which is pretty normal. OBP is only 267, however. Slugging, on the other hand, is 744, which looks like an OPS. That is actually his slugging percentage. He's drawn one walk in 19 games, 44 plate appearances. In the 43 at-bats, he has 11 hits. He has no doubles, no triples, and you might say, how does the slugging percentage get so high without any doubles or triples? Well, it's because he's leading Major League Baseball with 7 home runs through his 19 spring games. That is tied with Oneil Cruz for the Major League lead, in spring training, of course. Caveat. Oneil Cruz, who famously hit the hardest ball in recorded history in the StatCast era. And it is just ahead of Wyatt Langford, who famously, also famous, they're both famous, is a consensus top 5 prospect who's probably going to break camp with the defending world champions. So, those guys are pretty good. And Kyle Stowers is right up there with them. On Sunday against the Tigers, Stowers became the first player since Mike Zunino in 2018 to go deep 3 times in one spring training game. And some of you might remember Mike Zunino had like 33 home runs in just over 300 ABs a couple seasons ago. So also a pretty good power hitter. You can talk about home runs in spring training versus in the regular season. I think the first one was wind dated. I refused to say that about Jackson Holliday's. I will say that about Kyle Stowers's. The first home run against Kenta Maeda, launch angle of 41 degrees. Again, do with that what you will. But the second one, 438 feet off of Maeda also. And Maeda, was a top international free agent. He is somebody who has had a lot of success, was second in Cy Young voting in the shortened 2020 season. He is a very talented pitcher. He was hurt a little bit last year. But Kenta Maeda is, by all accounts, a major leaguer. And by all accounts, somebody who, was a somewhat sought-after free agent this year. Somebody that the Tigers had to go and pay multi-million dollars, so it's not, as far as spring home runs go, it's not the cheapest of them. And then the next one was off of Reese Olson, somebody who, I think threw over 100 innings or so last year, expects to figure into the Tigers' pitching plans again this year as a swingman, long relief, something of that sort. He did get hit around and gives up hard contact. That's not one of his better traits, but he's a major leaguer. All of that said, this is all taking a look at one spring training, and I think everyone has been somewhat overreacting, kind of freaking out and saying, does he actually have a shot at the roster? And so, I don't think that the Orioles are so simple-minded as to just go ahead and take only what they're seeing in one spring to decide on what's going to happen. They're going to play the roster games. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But, Stowers has put together this much larger body of work. He's a somewhat older, he doesn't have prospect status really anymore. He has graduated from rookie eligibility. But he, as far as people in the minors go, has accrued a pretty large body of work. He had just turned 26 years old. He's going to play this season at that age, and has been in AAA for good chunks of each of the last few seasons. So I guess the first thing I want to say is shout out to prospectslive.com and Sam Worth. Sam Worth put together a scraping tool that collects data, puts it in this nice digestible format. And so I went ahead and I took this and I limited this data set to players who saw 1,000 pitches or more. Technically, I say this to caveat in case somebody goes and looks it up and has more luck than me. It was this little slider tool, and I could not get it to land on 1,000, and none of the typing functions really worked. So I landed on 1,005.48 pitches or more. So you had to see 1,006 pitches to make my list. There are 185 players in this data set. The reason that I limited it in this way is pretty simply, for example, Ryan Mountcastle had vertigo and then he went to AAA. And I do not necessarily want to compare Ryan Mountcastle or enter any player who got hurt or Fernando Tatis coming back from his PED suspension. Any of these people are going to have skewed numbers. They're obviously way too good to be playing at AAA. So, in an effort to limit that, I found this set of 185 players. They each saw about 1,000 pitches. And looking through this data, I think the first thing that you find is Kyle Stowers hits the ball hard. I mean, legitimately hard. His max exit velocity, 111.6 miles an hour last year. That was 53rd out of the 185 players. It's just in the top third. And so even at that point, you can say he hits the ball hard. At the same time, you're probably not freaking out the way that I was after looking at all of this. If you look at his 95th percentile exit velocity, which is, a quantification, if you spread out all of the balls that he hit throughout the year, which one was, at the 95th percentile of all of those balls. And that's at 108.6 miles an hour. That number is 22nd out of the 185. So just outside of the top 10%, as opposed to just inside the top third. And that's ahead of names like Estevan Florial, who the Guardians just acquired, big power, big strikeout guy, prospect coming from the Yankees, who they didn't really have time for. And then Christian Encarnacion Strand, who the Reds brought up, is going to be wildly successful, everyone thinks. But also ahead of some more familiar names, like Jordan Westberg, Joey Ortiz, Heston Kjerstad, Colton Cowser. Every single one of them, 95th percentile exit velos, were lower than that of Kyle Stowers in this data set. Looking at purely his average exit velocity, straight the mean of every ball that he hit, 93.8 miles an hour. Out of the 185 players on this data set, that was second. That was number 2. After Mark Vientos, who the Mets said, "You're ready, come on up to the big leagues." If you cut the number of pitches in half, and I say in half, it was actually 504. I did what I could with that slider. I told you about it. But if you cut the number of pitches almost in half, and it gives you this data set of 336 players, he's third. Only one more person jumps in front of him. And that's Brett Beatty, somebody else who the Mets also said, "Come on up to the big leagues." The name he is just ahead of is somebody who made it up to the big leagues last year. And the thing that this guy was recognized for, well, a couple things. I'll give him a couple things. Was running fast and hitting the ball extremely hard. And that is Elly De La Cruz. Elly De La Cruz's average exit velocity was below that of Kyle Stowers' last year in AAA. So Stowers hits the ball hard. You know, it's a very, very, obvious, blatant thing. Stowers hits the ball hard. And, I think what you take from this, we see the max exit velo is, while good, of course, it's not necessarily the calling card. It's not some 80 grade power. It's not O'Neal Cruz. It's not Yordan Alvarez jumping up there, Joey Gallo, something like that. But he has some juice in his bat. But more importantly, his ability to get to that power and deploy it in game is what's advanced about him. He finds the barrel with frequency. And so I guess to back that up, of that bigger sample, the 336 guys, he is also third in hard hit rate. 57.7% of the time the ball was hit off of Kyle Stowers' bat, it was hit 95 miles an hour or harder. That's unbelievable. That's there are few rates that high in the big leagues. And, if you want to nitpick and you want to try to say, what about launch angles? Well, then you can go ahead and take a look at barrel percentages, which is a combo of exit velocity and launch angle. And he's 6th out of those 336 guys. He finds barrels when he makes contact. It is impactful. It is loud. And it is, a game-changing kind of offensive profile when he gets to the ball. And that's the big caveat. You might be asking, what is the problem? Well, I just told you. It's getting to the ball and actually making contact. In terms of swinging strike percentage, on fastballs, he was 15th highest out of 185, and that is just purely on pitches that you see, which percentage or what percentage of them did you swing and miss on. 15th highest out of 185 players on fastballs, 11th highest out of 185 players on breaking balls, 70th highest on off-speed pitches. So off-speed pitches, he's actually probably, right around average, slightly worse than average. But all in all, he has the 15th highest swinging strike percentage out of these 185 players who saw significant time at AAA last year. That means he just swings and misses a lot. You can take a look further at whiff percentage, which is on pitches that he actually swings at. What percentage does he miss? He misses over 32%, or he misses on 32% of the swings he takes, which puts him 24th out of those 185 players in whiff percentage. So definitely not ideal from that sense. He takes big swings and has big results or no results. It is an all or nothing kind of package. if you go ahead and you look at discipline, you kind of, there are always two ways to look at it. If he's swinging at good pitches, if he is um, still going up there with an approach and just taking these absolute G hacks that come up empty, that's a little bit more palatable. So I did go and check out, like some discipline metrics, like out of zone swinging percentage and such. And he's relatively middle of the pack there. He doesn't have awful plate discipline. His walk numbers are really pretty good. But he does just swing and miss is really what it is. And I think, that is in an effort to get to the power that we're just talking about, that in-game good contact. But in AAA last year, he struck out in almost a third of his at-bats. And, these are the kinds of problems that get exposed at the MLB level. In 2022, he struck out just under 30% of the time. And in his very short stint, I will give him, it was very short, at the beginning of last year, he struck out over 36% of the time. For a little bit of a reference, in the major leagues, average K rates are between 21-22%. So, he is striking out a significant amount. And when you do see those strikeout numbers at AAA even, it definitely does, I guess the gentlest way to say it is inspire some doubt in the ability to ultimately find the barrel at the big league level. And I don't want to totally shortchange the guy. I think that in his first stint in 2022, he really was not too bad. Last year, it was a very small sample size, so I think you can pretty much write that off. We've talked about small sample sizes with Cowser coming up last year. We've talked about it with Gunnar at the beginning of last season. You can't glean too much from it, but, all in all, I think that Stowers has shown at least reserve role level hitting ability at the big league level. I think that's pretty safe to say. And I think that, him being down and putting up 850 to 900 OPSs every year in AAA might not be that useful for him either. But you have to kind of take a step back and you have to say, okay, where does this guy truly stand with regard to the Orioles? We can sit here and talk all day about what he does well, what he does not do well. But at the end of the day, the Orioles won 101 games last year, and it's not so simple as to say he deserves to be on a big league roster, because we are not just any big league roster. And we're getting pretentious over here in Orioles fandom because we're not just any big league roster. And it's not the days where Richie Martin gets to spend an entire season at shortstop. That's not it anymore. I think the simplest thing to say with like where he is with team standing, I think it's clear that the Orioles like him and like what he brings. He plays good defense. We saw him uncork, 100 plus miles an hour when he was up in the bigs to throw somebody out at home. We've, even seen the power. That first home run off of Kyle Hendricks was electric. So, the Orioles have given him multiple shots in the majors, and it is because, I think they are fans of and truly true believers in what Kyle Stowers can do at the big league level. He is tied for the third most games this spring, and he has the seventh most at-bats. So they are giving him at-bats. They're giving him a workout. All of that said, we have talked on the podcast. We've talked on the podcast about how this lineup is a little bit lefty heavy. Some of that is by design because of Camden Yards, but at the same time, last year we all got so frustrated seeing them struggle against the Drew Roms and the Andrew Heaney's of the world, these like somewhat very not intimidating lefties. Toward the end of the season, it seemed like the Orioles struggled a little bit. We have really keep, like, I think the simplest thing is if you can neutralize Gunnar Henderson in the Orioles lineup, you're going to do very well for yourself. Obviously, we have some switch hitters. Adley and Santander are both very good from the right side as well. Mountcastle is a lefty killer when he's on. We expect that the post Vertigo Mountcastle will be around. But, the fact of the matter is that Gunnar is such a linchpin for this team. I think there is a difficult argument to say that we are better against a left-handed pitcher. You neutralize Gunnar, Cedric takes a step back. It's all, somewhat... It's an easier lineup to face as a lefty, I guess is the simplest thing to say. Because when you're a righty, those switch hitters are on the other side of the plate waiting for you too, and they're just as good over there. So, I digress. So, we have seen the Orioles lineup struggle a little bit. They are potentially a little bit lefty heavy. And I think, so then it's like, how many more lefties do you really stack on the bench? Kyle Stowers is not fighting for a starting job. He's fighting for a bench spot. So how many lefties do you stack on the bench? We'll get more we'll get more next week into like the final roster and how it's constructed. But I think that the simplest thing to say is you are a lefty outfielder, and there is also Heston Kjerstad, who is a lefty outfielder, and there is also Colton Cowser, who is a lefty outfielder. And there's really, I think that Cowser has put himself firmly in the position to take the fourth spot. There's really no argument that Cowser is not ahead of Stowers defensively, and there's really no argument that Cowser isn't ahead of him offensively. I guess we'll put Cowser first on the pecking order. Kjerstad, when the Orioles had their rosters expand in September, Kjerstad came up and Kyle Stowers was still down. Kjerstad had good success. I think that he showed well. He was able to get to balls. He struck out a little bit, but that's fine. But you've got two left-handed outfielders who are probably ahead of you on the depth chart. And, you as Kyle Stowers are clearly a step behind them, but also somebody who I think at this point clearly deserves a chance on a major league roster just by virtue of your ability to find the barrel and, get to this good in-game power that you have. So to that effect, being somebody who seems like he doesn't really have anything left to prove in AAA, it seems like the approach is what it is at this point. Rock Kubako has gone ahead and just put out a blog talking about opposing team scouts had been attending games at Ed Smith Stadium and, following the Orioles when they play away games, but specifically to check out the fringes of the Orioles outfield picture. I think that we look at, I don't think that anybody puts credibility in any, thought of Kjerstad or Cowser really being traded at this point. The big trading blocks who they would go for are already off the table. Dylan Cease got traded. The Marlins rotation is in shambles right now. Yuri Perez is getting imaging. Braxton Garrett is hurt. Edwin Cabrera is hurt. They're not trading Jesus Luzardo or anything like that. It's just not happening. So Kjerstad and Cowser are here. And so you go ahead and you check out the fringes of this outfield picture are Ryan McKenna and Kyle Stowers. And both of those guys, according to Rock, who probably was just sitting there and looked over and said, "Oh, there are scouts. Who are you? Who are you looking at?" I think that it makes a lot of sense. Ryan McKenna in particular is out of options, so he either breaks camp with the team or we have to pass him through waivers. If I'm another team, I'm not going to make it entirely easy for the Orioles. I think that the Orioles, if confronted with this choice, would go ahead. They would option Kyle Stowers. And yes, I think McKenna would make the major league team just by virtue of the Orioles always doing the thing that delays the decision. I think that the Orioles tend to take, I don't want to say the easy way out, but they like to maximize their flexibility. And in a way that us fans look at the opening day roster and say, all right, who are the 26 guys that we are taking on this season with? The Orioles don't do that. Mike Elias doesn't do that. He looks at this and says, okay, well, who are the 26 we're going to start with? And then we'll take some time. We'll see how those 26 are doing, and we can change them out if we need to. I think that the very, very simple thing is the Orioles organization is better if Ryan McKenna is in it than not. And that is a stupidly simple statement, and it's not like talking about who would be a replacement in the organization. It is just, he is a fourth outfield capable guy who hits lefties pretty well, plays great defense, and if he is just somewhere in the organization ready and waiting for you in case people get hurt, that's a good thing. We like that. And so the Orioles are going to do what they can to maximize that. They're going to, maximize the chances that Ryan McKenna stays with the team. And maximizing those chances is not trying to pass him through waivers at the early part of the season when other teams are still figuring out their roster. So I think the options for McKenna are, we trade him and try to find a reliever. There's definitely at least one bullpen slot open on the 26-man roster. We either try to trade him for a reliever, or he goes with us to Baltimore and is with us to face Reed Detmers or Patrick Sandoval, whoever they're starting on opening day. And I think that's the simple thing. Stowers, he has an option left. So the Orioles are definitely in no rush to trade the guy. They're not in any rush to give him away for nothing. The Orioles look at a situation like this and say, well, if we're not going to have Ryan McKenna in the system, it would be, excuse me, I don't know why I'm burping tonight. Crazy. If we're not going to have Ryan McKenna in the system, well, it'd be really nice to have a backup outfielder in Kyle Stowers who can play the corners pretty well, can get to the ball pretty well, and they will just try to take this route to maximize flexibility above all else, I think, is the move. Not necessarily the move for me. I like to push chips in a little bit more because I'm a fan like you guys. But this is the way the front office is probably going to look at things. So the Orioles have this configuration where we don't really need to go ahead and immediately, try to figure something out and trade for somebody. There is a configuration of the Orioles where McKenna slots in, Stowers goes to AAA. We just let the season play out a little bit. Cowser is the fourth outfielder. You can give guys days off. Santander can jump into the DH slot. You have Jorge Mateo as another guy who can hit lefties fairly well. You have these options, and you can just let the season play out and figure it out from there. And you can maybe try to slide McKenna through waivers later. I don't think there's any way, given the success that he has had at the major league level, success being a relative term. I'm not saying he hit 330 or anything like that, of course, but the success that he has had as a defender, as a steady contributor over multiple seasons, that's not the kind of guy who just goes unclaimed. I'm sure the Athletics would love to have Ryan McKenna in left field every day. So something to that effect. If you try to pass him through waivers, I think you will lose him. But I think your chances are a little bit better after teams have committed to certain options a short part of the way through the season. Talked a little bit more than I meant to about McKenna. This is about Stowers, of course, but circling back, scouts have been checking this out, and I think there is an avenue for the Orioles to go ahead and say, okay, Kyle Stowers is somebody who has these elite hard hit rates, elite barrel rates. He, puts up exit velos, maybe not the top band, but consistently high exit velos, and more consistently than just about anybody else in AAA over the last season. So this is a guy who has a skill set. This is a guy who can step in, play the corner outfield, and probably center field in a pinch. We've been seeing him this spring. He's looked good for all intents and purposes. This is somebody who could step into a big league lineup right now, at the minimum as a fourth guy, and probably as a low-end corner outfielder at this point in time. There are teams who will absolutely be interested in that. You could potentially look at him as a platoon guy. I know there's a whole section of Orioles Twitter that's screaming at me right now because Kyle Stowers actually has reverse platoon splits, in case anybody has not heard that yet. But big league clubs like to look at these in certain ways. Maybe they'll figure it out in a part-time role. I think that Stowers is ready to make a jump like that. I think that ultimately the Orioles have to be presented something good, because we can just play this waiting game that I alluded to with Stowers and McKenna, and Heston Kjerstad has options. So you could take Cowser, who is your probably top choice at this point. You could take McKenna, who is out of options and just maintains flexibility for you, and use options for those other two, Kjerstad and Stowers. Keep them at AAA for as long as it takes to figure it out. And then you obviously have to make more decisions at the very, very latest by next season. I don't think it would take that long. I think we're going to get some clarity by this trade deadline at the latest. But I think that's where things stand for Stowers. Right now, he is a guy who, again, firmly deserves a chance on a major league roster. I think he has proven, once again, this was a data set of 185 guys. He was second in average exit velocity. When you bump that out to 336 guys, he was third in exit velocity. That was ahead, again, of Elly De La Cruz, the phenom who, between us, was more of a league average hitter last year than anything else, but was putting up 118 mile an hour exit velos last year, hitting the ball 460, 480 feet. He's a phenom, and I would give him that. He's a phenom because he hits the ball incredibly hard. And Kyle Stowers had higher exit velos and obviously had a higher sample size down in AAA because he was down there longer. So he maintained he maintained this higher level of output from an exit velo standpoint for a longer duration of time through the season at AAA. It's really, really impressive numbers. You can't say enough about the way that Kyle Stowers has hit the ball. And the Orioles, I'm sure, will take whatever time they can, hopefully keep trying to refine the approach, keep trying to find a way to lower the whiff rates, lower the swinging strike rates, and turn this guy into a beast, more of a beast than he already is. Anyway, that is all that I've got for today. Don't disrespect Kyle Stowers. Keep him in your hearts. Keep him in your mind. We here at the Warehouse Podcast, we are always grateful to you guys for listening. As always, if you could follow the show, subscribe to us, YouTube, podcast apps, like, rate, comment, and always, always, always feel free to engage with us. Obviously, we love talking ball, and we are always happy to talk with you guys too. Commenting on YouTube videos, emailing us at thewarehousepod@gmail.com, hitting us up on Twitter at thewarehousepod, or X if you prefer that. And I've been jumping into the On the Verge Discord as well. We've had some really good conversations over there, so if you want to do that, shout out to On the Verge for all of the wonderful content they do and for creating this extra sub-community for us O's fans. We're grateful for it. And grateful to you guys for listening. Grateful to Kyle Stowers for being the wonderful human that he is. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. Thanks for listening.